Story 1. The Love Letter That Wouldn't Stop Coming. Valentine's Day is supposed to be a time of love, happiness, and romantic gestures, but for me, it turned into a terrifying nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It all began when I received a strange letter in the mail. At first glance, it looked like a simple Valentine's Day card, but as I opened it, I found it wasn't signed by anyone I knew. The handwriting was elegant, but unfamiliar. The message read, "To my one true love, you have no idea who I am yet, but you soon will." I thought it was some sort of prank, or perhaps a mix-up, but after reading the note, I tossed it aside, not thinking much of it. It wasn't until the following day that things started to get weird. A second card appeared in my mailbox, this time with a more cryptic message. "I see you, and I've always been watching. Be ready for what's coming." I started to feel uneasy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just some elaborate joke. But then, the phone calls began. I'd be in the middle of my day when my phone would ring. Each time, I would pick it up, but there was only silence on the other end. I tried to ignore it, but the calls continued, sometimes every few minutes. The silence was deafening. By the third day, I had received a dozen of these strange, unsigned cards, each one more disturbing than the last. The words began to blur between affection and obsession. One message included a photo of me walking home from work, taken from a distance, just barely noticeable. I started locking my doors and windows, but it didn't help. The cards kept coming, and so did the phone calls. The final straw came when I woke up on Valentine's morning to find a large bouquet of red roses on my doorstep. Attached to the bouquet was the same haunting message, "You belong to me now." I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person had vanished. I moved away a few weeks later, but the thought that someone had been watching me, following me so closely without my knowledge, still chills me to the bone. It's been years, and I haven't heard from the sender since that day. But I can't help but feel that they're still out there, waiting. Story 2. The Haunted Restaurant Reservation. I never believed in the supernatural, but my experience on Valentine's Day changed everything. It all started when my girlfriend, Rachel, and I made reservations at a fancy restaurant for a special Valentine's Day dinner. The place was renowned for its romantic ambience, and I wanted the evening to be perfect. We arrived at the restaurant and were immediately escorted to our table, a secluded booth in the corner with a view of the fireplace. The atmosphere was warm and cozy, the lighting dim and intimate. The food was excellent, and we were having a great time until I noticed something strange. There was an elderly couple sitting a few tables away from us. The man had a white beard, and the woman wore an old-fashioned dress, almost out of place in the modern restaurant. As the night went on, I couldn't stop glancing at them. They seemed to be staring at us, particularly Rachel, with unsettling intensity. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Suddenly, the man stood up, walked over to our table, and placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. He smiled kindly, but his eyes were cold and empty. "You should cherish this moment," he whispered, his voice gravelly. "Life is too short, and love doesn't always last." Before either of us could respond, he walked away, leaving me feeling unnerved. I turned to Rachel, but she seemed oddly calm, as if nothing had happened. She brushed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As we finished our meal, the couple stood up to leave. The old woman turned to Rachel, her eyes locking onto hers, and said softly, "He'll never let you go. He'll always be with you." I laughed nervously, unsure of what to make of her words. But as the night went on, strange things began to happen. Every time I looked at Rachel, I felt as though there was something different about her. It wasn't until later that night, when we returned to our apartment, that I understood what the elderly couple meant. Rachel began to act strangely. She would wake up in the middle of the night, speaking in a voice that wasn't hers, her eyes wide with terror. She began to change, becoming withdrawn, distant, and almost cold. It was as if the love we shared was being slowly drained from her, replaced by something dark and unnatural. I don't know what happened that night at the restaurant, but I suspect that the elderly couple wasn't human. Their warning wasn't a mere coincidence. It was a curse that I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. Story 3. The Valentine's Day Séance. A group of friends and I decided to do something different for Valentine's Day. Instead of going to a fancy restaurant or exchanging gifts, we thought it would be fun to hold a séance. We'd all heard stories of the supernatural, and the idea of connecting with spirits on such an eerie night intrigued us. I wasn't a believer in the paranormal, but I was willing to entertain the idea for the sake of fun. We gathered around a small table in the dimly lit living room, candles flickering all around us. One of our friends, Anna, was supposed to lead the séance. She had researched it, and I trusted her, though I was still skeptical. The mood was lighthearted at first, everyone joking around and laughing. But as Anna began speaking in an ancient language, something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped, and the atmosphere became thick, almost suffocating. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and the glass of wine I was holding shattered in my hand, sending shards flying everywhere. We all jumped back, horrified, but Anna didn't stop. She continued speaking in the strange language, her voice becoming increasingly deep and distorted. It wasn't long before the room grew darker, the shadows around us stretching unnaturally. One by one, we felt cold hands touch our shoulders, cold breaths on the back of our necks. Panic set in as we realized we weren't alone anymore. The room seemed to warp and twist, and in the center of the table, the spirit board began to move on its own. The planchette slid across the board, spelling out a message. "I have always been with you. Tonight, you are mine." The words sent chills down my spine. I tried to get up and leave, but I couldn't move. It was as if some invisible force was holding me in place. Suddenly, the lights went out, and in the pitch-black darkness, I heard a whisper in my ear, "You should never have called me." When the lights came back on, Anna was unconscious on the floor, and we were all shaken to our core. The séance was over, but the terror was only just beginning. In the days following that night, strange things started happening. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and we all began hearing whispers at night, voices that weren't our own. No matter how many times we tried to contact a medium or perform cleansing rituals, the presence never left. I don't know what we summoned that night, but it still follows us. Every Valentine's Day, I feel its presence again, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next chance to claim us. Story 4. The Valentine's Day Ghost. Valentine's Day had always been a special day for me and my fiancée, Emily. We had been together for 5 years, and this year, I wanted to make it unforgettable. I decided to take her to a secluded cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway, hoping to escape the bustle of city life and enjoy some time together. The cabin was rustic but charming, with a fireplace and large windows that overlooked the snow-covered landscape. We were the only ones there, and it felt peaceful, like we were the last 2 people on Earth. But as soon as we settled in, I noticed something odd. There was a portrait on the wall of an elderly couple, their faces pale and haunting. The longer I stared at the painting, the more unsettling it became. I didn't want to mention it to Emily, not wanting to ruin the romantic atmosphere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Later that night, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the floor above us. At first, I thought it was the creaking of the house settling, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Emily didn't seem to hear it, but I couldn't ignore it. When I went upstairs to investigate, the temperature dropped, and the air became thick with unease. I entered the bedroom and found the window wide open, despite the fact that it had been securely closed when we arrived. That night, I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of the bed. I turned, but there was no one there. Emily was sound asleep, her back turned to me. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. The next day, Emily woke up with strange bruises on her arms, and she didn't remember how they got there. She had also been having nightmares, dreams about a woman in a long, flowing dress standing by the window, watching her. As the weekend wore on, the ghostly presence grew stronger. It was clear that whatever haunted the cabin didn't want us there. The footsteps continued, and at night, we'd hear whispers in the dark. On our final night, we found an old journal hidden in a drawer. It belonged to the previous owner of the cabin, a woman who had died under mysterious circumstances. The journal spoke of a love affair gone wrong, and of a spirit that never left, seeking revenge. I don't know if it was the ghost of the woman or something else, but the feeling of dread followed us home. Valentine's Day was never the same after that, and we eventually broke off the engagement. Something in that cabin had changed us, and I still can't shake the feeling that we were never truly alone. Story 5. The Heart-Shaped Box. It was Valentine's Day, and my life was turned upside down by a gift I received from my ex-girlfriend. After months of no contact, she sent me a heart-shaped box, wrapped in a delicate ribbon. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, but the curiosity was too much to ignore. I opened it, half expecting chocolates or something sweet. Instead, I found a small, blood-red crystal inside, along with a note that read, "This will make you remember me forever." I didn't think much of it at first, but over the next few days, strange things started happening. I began hearing whispers in my apartment, soft murmurs that I couldn't place. My dreams were filled with visions of my ex, her face twisted with anger and sorrow. The more I tried to distance myself from the box, the more I felt its pull. I kept the crystal with me, unsure of why, but something deep inside me told me that I couldn't let it go. That night, the whispers grew louder, and I saw her, standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes cold and lifeless. The box was cursed. It was a symbol of obsession and despair. And no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape her.